you doing this call with me today.
You bet, man. Happy to be here. Happy to be here.
Thanks, man. Do you do a lot of these? Do a lot of podcasts reach out to you to want to interview?
Most of them being in the world of bourbon and whiskey and distilling and even flavor beverage. But yeah, done a few before. Yes, sir.
Awesome, man. Yeah, well, our podcast is not exclusive to that. We're kind of an all-encompassing platform. We talk about a lot of different stuff going on around Austin, and over the past year or so, I've just noticed like how big of a brand you guys have turned into. I mean, I hear about it all the time. I see y'all's logo around. You guys are pretty much in every liquor store, it feels like. So, and I noticed a while back that we were friends on Facebook, and I felt compelled to reach out, and I felt like it was a good opportunity for me.
Oh, couldn't be more thrilled, man. Although I didn't grow up in Austin, I consider myself a true Austinite. Having been here for, over 20, 25 years now. So love the city and happy to be a part of it.
That was actually going to be one of my questions, is kind of how long you've been here. I saw on the website you kind of grew up in West Texas. Speak to us a little bit about how that evolution came about and kind of how you ended up here.
Oh, you bet. So I grew up in a small town called Menard. Go Yellow Jackets first and foremost. But, Menard, I had a graduating high school class of just over 30 people and, pretty small place to grow up. My parents owned a motel and restaurant there in Menard. So I grew up kind of, honestly having to work quite a bit and even washing dishes at a young age and then learning how to cook, and kind of quickly learned that I had a passion both for business as well as for food and beverage. And after I graduated high school, moved down to Austin to go to school at the University of Texas, and moved down here. Got a job over at the Four Seasons, and that was a pretty transformative experience as well for several years there at the Four Seasons, learning their service standards, their approach to guest service, and then of course just the culinary education. And I finished my first level of sommelier training while I was there too. So it was a really good spot to be, to say the least.
Yeah, that Four Seasons. I mean, I was born and raised in Austin. I've lived here, a long time, like yourself. And that Four Seasons, it seemed like for a long time was like the premier high-end hotel in Austin. I mean, now they're all over the place. But yeah, I mean, my mom used to take me there when I was a kid, and we would go eat at the TJ Fridays in the back and kind of sit out where the water is. I miss that though.
No, definitely. I've always said it would be interesting to see a documentary of the group of people that worked there during that time. There's a lot of folks that I stay in touch with that have gone on to very good success and things like that. So there's something to be said about the level of training the Four Seasons provided. And then I also just think, like you were saying, that was the place for anybody with a focus on talent and a true career in food and beverage of where you wanted to be. The only downside is what you were talking about out in the patio area. Anytime that you were, waiting on tables or anything like that, people would get really frustrated with you if the bats didn't fly one night. So that was always one of the downsides.
Yeah, man, I have some good memories in that place. But how did you get into the whiskey business? I mean, where did kind of tell us about kind of how you're ascending into that.
Well, so I when I left the Four Seasons, it was that I had met my soon-to-be wife, Rachel, at the time, and she worked in the tech business. At that point, I believe she was with a group called Motive, but that was swallowed up by IBM.
Okay.
And so she worked a pretty traditional 9-to-5 job, and of course, my lifestyle was anything but that. So I kind of realized that I had to make some changes to be around her more and figure out what I wanted to do. So of all things, I got into workers' comp insurance for a while, became an adjuster, saw some opportunities in the business world there, and spun off with another gentleman named Nate Powell. And he and I started a series of 3 different medical service companies that focused on the insurance world. Basically had team of about 300 doctors that traveled around the Texas area for us and did arbitration on various issues with medical claims. So that business got up and going. I eventually sold it off here, gosh, about 8 or 9 years ago. But as I started doing that, I really started missing the passion that I had in a career, and decided to start up a small craft distillery. And at that point, we were just making rum from a commercial perspective. So Treaty Oak Platinum rum came out back in 2006. And the concept behind it was just being able to make a Texas product from scratch, from raw ingredients. And that was such a new approach that TABC at the time didn't even have a way to document that or respond to it.
Wow.
Because everything that was going on at that point, is neutral grain spirit brought in and then redistilling it or filtering it and cleaning it up. So nobody was doing that. So I actually had to write on like legal paper and send it in, how much molasses I brought in from South Texas and how we fermented and distilled and all those things. So it was an interesting start. But from day one, I knew that whiskey was what I wanted to get into. During my time at the Four Seasons was right when there's kind of this rebirth or reawareness, and maybe it's even better to call it a premiumization of the bourbon marketplace. And that was whenever you saw Basil Hayden first come out as kind of this like entry level high end. And, I started learning about the Pappy Van Winkle series and Blanton's and all these different brands, and got really, really enthused by that. And it was intriguing to me because when you look at products like whiskey, other things that are aged around the world, part of the discussion about them is, where they were made and where they were aged. So that sense of a, terroir, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
And that conversation never really comes up with the aging of bourbon, probably at that point, because 100% of it roughly was made in Kentucky. But a big part of making whiskey, of making bourbon, is where you age it, your temperature swings, your highs and lows, what those means, your humidity, all kinds of different factors like that. So as we started making Texas bourbon, I think we made our first batch in 2007. And we didn't release any of our own in-house made bourbons until I think it was about 2016. So we spent right at 10 years experimenting and educating ourselves, learning mash bills, because we wanted to be obsessive about this and create something that was truly made for Texas. And so, the grains that we use are all Texas grains, with the exception of the barley, the limestone filtered water out here in Dripping Springs, these hot, scorching Texas summers.
Yeah.
So we've just kind of figured out how you take all of those ingredients and drive them ahead. But, it's not like, my during the pandemic, my bread education of learning how to make sourdoughs and all these different things. And it's like every day you can make a new batch. With the bourbons and the whiskeys, we'd make a mistake and we wouldn't realize it was a mistake for 2 years.
Oh, wow.
And so there's a humbling part of that process too, that kind of makes you realize that, you're just a part of a conversation, a stepping stone, if you will, and that, things are going to continue to change over time.
Yeah, I don't know a ton about the distilling process. I'm kind of a novice to some of this stuff, but it almost seems like, if one additive is off a little bit, I mean, is it going to just throw the whole batch off? I mean, do you just basically have to kind of discard the whole batch at that point, or what's the protocol typically?
That's the approach that we took. A lot of other, as you get bigger and bigger, it's easier to cover up your mistakes because you can blend them into massively large batches.
I see.
But really with that initial process, you're changing such vast elements, from using different yeast to, are you going to be a wheated bourbon or a high rye, different things like that. There's just so many different factors that it's even just fine tuning to the point that it's like, the way I would say is like adding your salt and pepper whenever you're finishing searing off a steak or something. But with the whiskey, like all of that has to happen on day one. You don't get a chance to change what you've put into the barrel.
I see. Yeah. How many, like, just on average, I mean, how many barrels are you guys storing, on just any given day, if I'm using the right nomenclature there? I mean, you guys have a huge facility out there in Dripping Springs. I mean, are you guys storing like hundreds of barrels, or what kind of storage are we talking about?
huge is always kind of in the eye of the beholder a little
Hmm.
bit, because we're huge compared to what we once were, and
Right.
also kind of by the craft distilling standards, but microscopic compared to a lot of our Kentucky brethren. I mean, those guys are much, much larger. But
That
with
makes
what we
sense.
have now and the still that we're working with, we had a rather down year in production with COVID and us switching over to doing sanitizers and different things like that. So not a big year of production this last year, but currently we have a little over five to 6,000 barrels in storage right now.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Um, and then we also have we produce here at Treaty Oak the Ghost Hill bourbon, the Day Drinker, as well as several different special mashes and releases that we do. So all of those are made here and aged here. But our Red Handed bourbon is actually a story of us making bourbon and aging it in Kentucky. So we've also got a few thousand barrels over at Bardstown Distilling in Kentucky. And the fun part of that, of working with Bardstown, is that we were able to go in there and actually fully control the mash bill, the yeast, the barrel char level, the distillate proof, the barrel entry proof, every little aspect of production. So it's truly us getting to make a Kentucky bourbon, and we chose to make it a high rye. And what I mean when I say high rye, all bourbons have to legally be at least 51%. And then you're going to have a portion of the bourbon that is a malted barley that kicks off your fermentation process.
Hmm.
But then your third adjunct grain is usually going to be either wheat or rye. And we found that the wheated bourbons do very well here in Texas because they're softer, they're sweeter, they can tolerate the heat a little bit more. Versus rye brings in a spiciness, kind of like a more harsh finish, which, in my opinion, makes wonderful bourbons over time, but you have to age in a softer climate. So that's why we do the high rye in Kentucky and the wheated bourbons here in Texas.
Oh, okay. Um, what kind of separates the Texas whiskey distilling business kind of aside from like, Kentucky and Tennessee? Obviously, they're kind of the summit, of whiskey distilling, but, is it a competitive market here? Do you see it growing? Like, kind of speak to that a little bit, where you kind of see um, Texas whiskey distilling kind of going over time.
Well, in Texas, you can open carry your bourbon. That's the no. I'm just kidding.
Right.
Now the big difference. Kentucky obviously has a huge leg up just in the amount of time they've been making and how they can understand their climate and what their outcome is. There's a saying around the Kentucky area that making great bourbon is really easy. All it takes is that your dad and your granddad made great bourbon and you've got good bourbon. So they've
Ah,
kind of got it where it's a family tradition that's passed
legacy.
down
Yeah.
versus here. So I think that the big difference for us is obviously the temperature and the aging process, as well as us beginning to dig into using some different grains. So the grains are what have become very interesting to me of late. We work with a gentleman, a good friend of mine, James Brown, who runs the Barton Springs Mill, which is actually adjacent to Treaty Oak now. He bought some property from us and built his new mill there. So he handles all of our grain needs. And a lot of what James and I talk about is, various heirloom strands, things that have been kind of forgotten that you can bring into. So what I would say is that while Kentucky they're a little bit longer in the tooth, if you will, and they've got the experience that we don't have, we sure as hell have the innovation and the drive in Texas. And I think that Texas has a sense of pride, and you've got various other distilleries out there really pushing themselves and pushing us. And it's a friendly, competitive arena where everybody tries to raise themselves up. But we're proud to stand alongside folks like Garrison Brothers, um, Balcones, Andalusia. So there's a lot of really good whiskeys coming out of Texas, and we're just proud to be a part of that story.
Yeah, it seems like you guys are really kind of at the head of all this from what I gather, at least here in Central Texas. Like I said, I mean, I always hear about you guys through acquaintances. A lot of people love going out there, obviously, to your the ranch out there in Dripping Springs. Um, yeah, I think you guys have a really bright future for sure. One of the things I was going to ask you is all of the manufacturing as well done there in Dripping Springs, like as far as the bottling goes?
It currently is, yes, sir.
Okay. That's what I thought. I think that's really cool that you guys have it all integrated right there on the ranch. I mean,
It,
that's really the way I think for any entrepreneur who's starting a business, I think that's always kind of the dream is to just like have everything there at your HQ from, A to Z.
oh, you're absolutely right. And one of the biggest things for us was whenever, gosh, I guess it was back in 2015, when myself and one of the guys that's been with me the absolute longest here, Joshua Holland, he and I went down to the Capitol multiple trips. And as me serving as the president of the Texas Distilled Spirits Association, got a lot of the rather archaic laws changed here in Texas. We got great support from everybody from the Texas Package Store Association to Discus, Texas Restaurant Association, everybody, the distributors, Republic National, everybody getting behind us. And we were able to make it where we can sell bottles and cocktails at a distillery. And that seems commonplace now, but when we first started, we couldn't have any visitors even inside of our distillery. And so
Yeah.
flipping that to where we're able to be a tourist destination and we're able to share our story. And then we're also able to get into the food and beverage side as well as music, because for us, what Treaty Oak is all about, it's three things, man. It's Texas whiskey, Texas music, and Texas barbecue. And those are the three things that I'm passionate about and our teams are, and just where we like to be able to have people come out to a place that I think you'll probably be able to appreciate this growing up in Austin is reminiscent more of, the 90s version of Austin and kind of what
Yeah.
it was like then when there's a lot of outdoor space and, good food and music and drinks, and us being able to share that and showing that we take our whiskey making, our barbecue, and our cocktails ridiculously seriously, but in no way do we take ourselves too seriously.
Yeah. That kind of seems to be, it's interesting. One of the things you mentioned, kind of about getting the laws changed is I have noticed this kind of uptick or new trend, if you will, kind of in the last like maybe 5 to 7 years, where it just seems like, I mean, obviously there was always like wineries, like people go to wine, they'll go to like a winery and do wine tastings, but you're starting to see a lot more of like the whole brewery culture has gotten really big, or going to distilleries now. So is that kind of what you were speaking to in regards like getting kind of that stuff changed so you can actually go and go to a brewery now or go to um a distillery? Because I mean, like 10 years ago I never really heard of people like, hey, we're going to go hang out at the brewery, but now that's like what everybody talks about. Do you know why that trend has kind of gotten more popular now?
You
Is it
know, I,
because of the laws changing, or is it just because a lot more people are getting into microbrewing?
I think it's a combination, kind of a multitude of factors that play in there. I think it's definitely the changing of the laws, because it couldn't happen without that first and foremost. But
Yeah.
I think secondary to that is because one of the demands that as technology has moved forward, as we've become a world where transparency isn't just, whenever we first started at Treaty Oak, I would say that we wanted transparency to be a key tenet of what we were doing, to always be honest and open and tell our processes and kind of move away from this man behind the curtain, if you will, with distilling, where nobody knows what it means. And people say stuff like, 14,000 times distilled vodka. That's all just frankly bullshit.
Right.
And we wanted to be able to be open and honest. But in today's world, I would say a really cool aspect of what technology has brought to us in social media is that you don't have a choice but to be transparent and honest. And a byproduct of that is people wanting to go to where things are made because you believe in the product. You have a sense that you're paying the person that made your beer, you're paying the person that made your whiskey, you're experiencing it in the way that they want you to experience. And it's more about that rawness and that attention to detail with the flavor and the people you're sharing that experience with, and less about going to a bar and getting bottle service like it used to be and showing off and that type of thing. So I think there's been a cultural shift there.
Yeah.
And then I think the third thing is what you described. It's that people have started to appreciate alcohol in a different way. Like, granted, there's no escaping that alcohol is a means to an end, that people drink to relax and some different factors like that. But we've seen a shift from just vodka or just light beer to people drinking more flavorful products and things that, while still could be conceived as sessionable, at least have really good flavor. Products like the canteen vodka sodas that are out there that, are alcoholic beverages, but have some flavor to them, and something that you can identify and enjoy. And that's the way we treat our cocktail program at Treaty Oak too, where, you can bounce back and forth from having stuff that are, one of our special sciencey cocktails that we did was called aging whiskey, where we have what's called white dog, which is the general term for unaged whiskey, because it comes off the still clear. So a clear unaged whiskey, but then we work with folks like Fat Ice, which is a custom ice company based out of Austin, to do things like an ice cube that has the various flavors in it that melt into the white dog that taste just like an aging whiskey. So flavors like tobacco, wood, butter, cinnamon, things like that that can come through from the ice. But then we also just make really good sweet teas with a shot of vodka in them. So it's like, you can kind of choose your experience. But I do think that last tier of it has been important too, as people have began to at times drink less, but drink more to appreciate what they're having and the flavor aspect of it.
Yeah, no, that's interesting, man. It almost kind of seems like the way wine enthusiasts approach wine has sort of transcended into other variations of alcohol a little bit.
That is,
Because, like just growing up, it was like there was like wine enthusiasts and they were just really into how it was cultivated and the grapes and all that stuff. But now it just seems like you're seeing a lot more of that now in other forms of alcohol, which is kind of interesting.
Yeah, it is, man. And even with food too. Like, we take a lot of time in our company to talk to each other and have conversations about flavor and what we're tasting. And, the longer people work with us, the more and more comfortable that they get with that conversation. But, initially a lot of people, like, it's when you talk about flavor, you say sour, sweet, maybe 6 to 8 terms that people have for food. And on the other aspect of that, think if you were describing everything that you see and all you had were 8 words for it, like, yellow, rough, and tall, or whatever it might be. So helping people expand how they can talk about the flavor experiences and feel comfortable with whatever word comes to mind is a big part of what we push, including we even do things like where we'll sit down and do whiskey tastings. And instead of just saying what you're tasting, we say, all right, let's identify each one of these whiskeys as a genre of music. Like maybe this one's punk rock, or this one's, more of like some sort of like a jazz or something like that. And then within that, like identifying a band, and then underneath that, identifying a specific song even that this brings to you. And the fun part of that, with that kind of associative learning, is that people remember it longer. They'll look at that bottle of Ghost Hill and say, "Oh man, that reminded me of some Operation Ivy song," or something like that. And it's a fun way to get people to start to think about flavors and experiences differently. But yeah, it's cool getting to see that it's moved beyond kind of the wine snob world, if you will. I can say that because I was one. I was when I did my song training. But it's like it's just cool to get to talk through that, and even seeing my own daughters. I've got a 12-year-old, a 9-year-old, seeing them talk about the smells of different cheeses and mac and cheese and things like that, man.
Yeah, no, that's awesome, man. I mean, like you said, kind of making the correlation to music. I think that really personifies it for a lot of people, So, yeah, my last question for you: where do you kind of see what's the vision like in the next 5 to 10 years for Treaty Oak? I know that's kind of a nuanced question, but yeah, I definitely would love to hear kind of what you guys have going on, maybe what's in store.
There's a few different comments that I would have there. I think that we're currently working on kind of some I would say some cutting edge technology and innovation with the changes we're seeing in the ready to drink and cocktail world, including later this year having our own line of 100 ml cocktails come out. We have an old fashioned and a peach julep on that front, and then on the 12-ounce cans, kind of something that's what I would say is an upgrade from your White Claws or your canned seltzers that you're seeing out there. We're doing the Hill Country highballs, which are a blend of whiskey with soda with a flavoring agent. So it's cool to get to see those coming and kind of where those could take things. But
Yeah.
then also it's maintaining our focus on producing better and better bourbons and growing the bourbon production. And then, as we look outside of Texas, Texas is such a big backyard to have. We still have a lot to win there. But I do think that as we're looking to spread outside of Texas, the thought process of being able to use our barbecue program and take that on the road and honestly simply get liquid to lips as much as we can.
Awesome, man. Yeah, no, I like I said, y'all's the brand recognition